I moved in with my boyfriend yesterday. We've been together for 5 years now, and we're old and wise enough to settle down and finally leave our parents' houses. He just turned 24, and I'm 22. He's the love of my life. His name is Jamie, and I couldn't be happier to be living with him. When we decided to make the leap, we spent 2 months looking at flats and houses. We couldn't afford to buy yet, so renting was our only option, but the prices were astronomical. For our budget, we would have been lucky to get a box room and a stove. Jamie works for a local 24-hour fast food restaurant, and I'm training to be a teacher. The early stages of training don't pay much, and I owe a lot in student loans, so finances are tough. We had almost given up hope until we found our flat. It was nothing special, but to us it was a palace. A spacious 2-bedroom apartment with views of a city park, a balcony, and local conveniences. It was in a tower block in a not-so-nice area, but neither of us had been wealthy growing up. We weren't fussy, just grateful to be together. The advert was sweetened by the deposit-free option and open-ended tenancy. The landlord was happy to sign a 5-year contract if we wanted. That sort of thing never happens in the city. We were told that along with no deposit, we would also have no inspections, but would be liable to pay for any damage when we ended the tenancy. I'd never heard of anything quite like it. We knew that for our budget and location, we weren't going to get any better. We snapped the place up fast, not even bothering to view it. It felt like our only chance. Move-in day rolled around quickly, and yesterday we got the keys to our first home together. It was such a strange feeling. The day was chaos, getting our stuff in and up in the lift. We were flat number 42 on the 7th floor. The items we couldn't get in the lift had to be taken up all the stairs by the removal men. I think they were grateful we weren't any higher, but I still wish we had been able to give them a better tip. In the evening, we settled down on our second-hand sofa, given to us by a cousin of a friend, and watched some TV. We smoked cigarettes on the balcony looking at the park and fell asleep on our mattress on the floor super early because we had no energy to put the bed together yet, and Jamie had work at a hideous time of the morning. We slept soundly last night. I felt safe and happy. I don't think that feeling is coming back anytime soon, and it's all due to the note I found this morning. I found it in the kitchen, having a coffee, hours after Jamie had left for his early shift at work. It was in one of the cupboards that were fixed to the wall. There were a bunch of useful items from the previous tenant, spare keys to the flat, a set of tiny keys that locked and unlocked the windows necessary for those with kids this high up, spare smoke alarm batteries, and a folded-up piece of paper. The note was handwritten with new occupier of flat 42 in beautiful cursive on the blank side. I opened it up and sat down to read. I can't really describe it to you, so I'm going to copy it out below. Dear new occupier. Firstly, welcome to your new home. I lived here before you for 35 years with my husband. Unfortunately, he had an incident at home recently that I'd rather not discuss that claimed his life. My sister has now decided I can't keep up with the demands of the property and has insisted that I move in with her and her husband. I was reluctant at first, but the stairs do kill me at my age, and without Bernie it's filled with sadness. Anyway, when you've lived somewhere for as long as I have, it feels like a person that you know. You understand its personality and what makes it tick. I thought it was probably pertinent that I impart some of that knowledge on you. It's a wonderful home. Honestly, I have lived through best and worst years, and leaving it behind is very emotional, but if you are to survive and get the best out of it, then there are some steps you need to follow. 1. The landlord will never bother you. He doesn't visit, call, or communicate in any way. But make sure to pay your rent in a timely fashion always. I have only dealt with him once in 35 years, and let's just say I never missed another rent day. Any repairs required, you speak to the agent you rented the place with. 2. Do not use the communal lift between 1.11 and 3.33 a.m. Just don't do it. This step is vital if you are to have a happy life here. It really is life or death. Don't do it. This has cost me and many others in the building greatly, and I would rather not elaborate on why you shouldn't do this. Just please don't do it. I cannot stress this enough. 3. When you hear the strange animal noises coming from flat 48, don't question it. Mr. Prentice lives there, and he's a lovely chap. Don't be afraid to say hello to him in the corridor or on the stairs. He's old school, so he never risks the lift, but whatever you do, don't check on him when you hear the noises. You'll know when you hear them. 4. If you ever come across a window cleaner on the balcony, ignore him. He may seem like the nicest fellow you've ever had trying to sell you something at the door, but it really is best that you don't engage. He will go away if you ignore him. But he tries pretty hard the first few times, so you'll need some resilience. Whatever you do, don't offer him anything. No money, no hot drink. 5. Don't leave food scraps out. Bin or refrigerate them immediately. If you have small animals, it is imperative that you watch them eat and take away any leftover food immediately after they are done. This and Rule 2 go hand in hand. The things forage all day and seem to really love animal feed. You don't want them in your flat, I promise. You can leave what you want out between 1:11 and 3:33 a.m., so you may want to feed your pets then. 6. Don't communicate with any neighbors who claim to come from flats 65 to 72. These flats suffered a fire in the late 80s that devastated the whole floor. All the residents died in their homes. The building was mostly council-owned at the time, and they never bothered to renovate the flats. They've been empty ever since, but every now and again someone will knock at your door claiming to live in one of these flats and ask to borrow some sugar. They will seem entirely average, but you must shut and lock the door immediately. I installed 2 extra security bolts to avoid these fuckers. I don't like to swear at my age, but they really are fuckers. 7. Simple one for you here, keep a weapon in each room. Sometimes you follow all these steps and something still slips through the net. Better to be safe than sorry. 8. The building has a committee that will try and get you to join. It's one of those neighbors groups about improving living conditions for all residents. It's a nice group, and the lady who runs it, Terry from flat 26, is a fantastic neighbor. By all means get involved. But I wouldn't recommend babysitting Terry's 2 children. She'll ask you because the poor woman needs a break. But if you accept, don't say I didn't warn you. 9. Stray hairless cats sometimes roam in the hallway. I know they're supposedly a special, expensive breed, but they don't belong to anyone. They're mostly harmless, but don't pick them up. Not unless you see one of those neighbors that claims to live in 65 to 72. Then grab the cat and lock it inside with you. It'll burn your skin a little, but the cats are friendly and I wouldn't want to see them hurt. 10. There is no way to fix the damp patch on the ceiling in the bedroom. Sometimes it will turn a deep crimson and look quite concerning. But please try not to be alarmed. It doesn't drip, it doesn't get any bigger, and it's been there longer than I have. The landlord won't budge on it, according to the agents. I flagged it many times, even called the police the first night it changed color. But it was a waste of time, and it will be for you too. It's best to ignore it. 11. You can trust the postman. His name is Ian Flanders, and he's been the postman since before I moved in. He has his own key to the main door and delivers post to the door every morning at 8:54. I can't include everything here, or it would become a novel, but if you have any questions, Ian will help you. 12. Finally, the first few weeks are the worst. You'll feel like you've made a mistake. I'm sure reading this you already do, but if you can get through the first few weeks, it really is a lovely block to live in. Every property has its quirks, and this one is a little extra special, but you can be truly happy here if you just take my advice. I wish you all the best, I really do. Yours truly, Mrs. Prudence Hemmings. I don't really know what to think after reading the note. Hopefully it was some sort of joke, but the agent had said the previous tenant was an elderly lady, and I can't see anyone named Prudence Hemmings attempting to play practical jokes on someone they'd never met. There were also parts of the note I couldn't disprove. There was indeed a large damp patch above the bed that me and Jamie had already discussed reporting. No crimson, but it definitely existed. I had also commented on a beautiful Sphinx cat roaming the halls as we were moving in. I started to get seriously freaked out. Our dream, our beautiful little home, had just become a source of fear and confusion. I checked the time and it was 9:14. Damn it, out of time to catch Postman Ian. When I opened the door to check, sure enough, 2 letters addressed to a Mrs. Hemming sat on the doorstep. At about 11:15, my worst fears were truly confirmed when a friendly middle-aged looking man carrying window cleaning equipment knocked on my balcony door. I ignored him. I didn't want to take the risk until I'd spoken to Jamie and showed him the note. I'd texted him already to rush home. I felt bad as the man rapped his knuckles against the door for over 10 minutes. But honestly, the longer it went on, the more I was terrified. My windows were sparkling, and due to our lack of curtains, I couldn't even hide from his gaze. I felt so exposed. He stayed for a total of 30 minutes exactly, and never once did he stop looking at me or knocking. He shouted the occasional ultra-friendly line or humble request for a beverage in the heat through the door, but I did my best to avoid eye contact. When he finally left, I looked outside every window in the flat, but I couldn't see him on any of the other balconies or see any equipment suggesting he was around. He had vanished completely. Jamie still hadn't texted me back. He must have been having a rough shift. It was a Friday and they were always busy. It wasn't often that he didn't reply. He was due home in around an hour anyway. I read the note probably hundreds of times over. I tortured myself reading it for the next hour, desperately waiting for Jamie to come through the door to tell me it was all crazy and I should relax. I hoped for that so much. But Jamie never came. His shift should have finished around midday, but by 2 p.m. he still wasn't home. I panicked. I cried. I left over 100 voice messages on his phone, but got nowhere. I finally decided it had been long enough that calling his work wouldn't embarrass him, and his boss told me that he had never turned up for his shift. I thought about it, what could have happened? And then it hit me. Jamie's shift started at 4 a.m. today. He would have left the flat at 3:15 and taken the lift down the stairs. I don't know what to do. I've tried to convince myself it was all just a big joke. Maybe Jamie wrote the note and got his boss in on it. A voice in my head kept telling me that he couldn't write like that if he tried, but I had to attempt to fool myself. It's getting late and he still isn't home. What if it's all true? I think we made a big mistake. So much has happened in the last 24 hours. I'm so stressed and I barely slept since I discovered that Jamie was missing. It's starting to make me feel a little twitchy, but I thought I'd better update you guys. I was overwhelmed by all the suggestions you gave me and have taken more than a few of them on board. I'm definitely going to be getting a huge planter full of sage for the balcony, and I did spill a little salt in my doorway. I'm sorry to disappoint, but that didn't help at all. There's nothing I'm following quite like Mrs. Hemming's rules. I've followed them to the letter so far, and lo and behold, I'm still alive. That's not to say it hasn't been tough. He'll start from the beginning. I was going crazy. And a few hours after my last post, Jamie still hadn't returned. He had been gone for almost 24 hours. His work have called me multiple times. I don't know what to say, so I just keep ghosting the calls. I was bang in the middle of the danger time when I decided checking the lift had to be my first step. But I wasn't going to break that rule. I waited. I waited desperately for 3:34 to come, and I'm ashamed to say that when it did, I remained paralyzed to our sofa for almost half an hour before I found the nerve to leave the flat. It was 4:02 when I finally reached the lift. The lift in this building is old and rickety. It hasn't been updated in a very long time and has likely been here as long as the building. Its big, clunky buttons stared back at me as I glared at them, hoping for some sort of answer or clue. My heart thumped and I was overcome with a feeling of dread, but nothing came of any of it. It was hopeless. I stepped inside the lift, rode it up and down a few floors, and searched the entire perimeter with a phone torch for anything I could find. I found nothing. Jamie had completely disappeared. Sobbing and exhausted, I rode back to floor 7 and turned my key in flat 42, the perfect home that felt anything but home at that point. I sat at the cheap flat-pack dining table we'd managed to put together on move-in day and cried, my hands shaking as I held my phone. I was flitting between reading all your comments and contemplating calling the police for an hour. But I decided to call my friend Georgia instead. I needed a real person here. Things were so crazy I wasn't sure the police would be able to help with what little information I had. But I knew I needed to sound it out with someone. He'll spare you the details again, but I told her everything. She promised she'd be with me in the late morning. She had to take her younger brother to school. I waited anxiously. Not before arming every room exactly as advised. Before I knew it, I looked at the clock and it was 8:23. I had around half an hour until the postman was due to show up. There was no way I was missing him today. I stood by the door looking vacantly at the wood, like someone in a film who was possessed. The exhaustion was really setting in, but Jamie was all I could think of. Pure adrenaline was keeping me standing. At 8:52, I opened the door. The next 2 minutes were the longest of my life, but when I saw him, a wave of relief swept my entire body. Right on cue, 8:54, the postman Ian Flanders stood in front of me, a smile that barely hid his concern covering his younger-than-expected face. He didn't look old enough to have been the postman for over 35 years, but I was too distracted by the answers that I needed from him to care. "You must be the new tenant," he stated, but in a way that it sounded like a question. I struggled with my answer, so I got straight to the point. "Mrs. Hemmings left me a note. She said to speak to you if—" "Can I come in, dear? I think we need to chat." I ushered Ian in, my hands still shaking as I flapped them in the direction of the sofa, gesturing for him to sit down. I shoved the now slightly crumpled note into his lap and waited. "I'm glad Prue still thinks that highly of me. I will miss that old girl," he said with a coy smile as he reached the end of the note. "Can you help me or not?" I had no time for his ego trip over a moved-on neighbor. "I can help, but I can't stop for long, so it'll have to be quick. I've walked these halls delivering the post for 40 years. I've seen it all, everything Prue's mentioned and more. What do you need to know?" he said. Ian was nothing like what I expected. The note made me feel like he was going to be a kindly, old granddad-type figure, but I couldn't have been more wrong. Postman Ian spoke with a thick city accent and wore a heavy gold chain around his tattooed neck. He had dyed his graying hair boot polished black. His demeanor was thankfully non-threatening but extraordinarily cocky. He was the sort of man I imagined in a betting shop, rubbing his grubby hands on notes as he bragged over a win. He didn't ask as he lit a cigarette in my living room. I didn't question it. We would usually smoke outside, but I wasn't going to argue over technicalities. I grabbed a bowl for the ash and lit one too. "Let's start with the things in the lift. My boyfriend is missing, and he took the lift at 3:15 over 24 hours ago. We hadn't got this note yet. I haven't heard from him since. I need to get him back." I barked at him, as if the louder I spoke, the more I could influence his answer. But nothing prepared me for what he said. His skin turned pale and his harsh-looking face became more sympathetic as he explained. "He's dead, love. Forget about him now. Only one person has ever come back from the lift at that time of night, and it was Prue herself. After witnessing it, those creatures ripping their victim apart, poor Prue was traumatized. Your boy is gone. Let go and follow the rules." He was blunt, but I could tell he felt sorry for me. "There must be something I can do," I pleaded. "There are things I've heard to bring back those who are lost, but I've never seen solid proof they work. It would be irresponsible of me to tell you to do something that might get you killed too. It's nice here, honest. Just get over him and live the status quo." Sorry if I sound harsh. I don't mean to, but you seem like a decent young lady and I don't want to see you go too soon. I asked about what Mrs. Hemmings had seen in the lift, and if they were sure it happened to all who entered it. I refused to believe that Jamie was dead. There had to be something I could do, and if I knew what I was dealing with, I could be better prepared. It was awful what happened. I wasn't there, but this is what I was told. Little Lila was such a cute kid. She used to open the door and give me a tip when I delivered the post. She was Prue's granddaughter. Lila was her son's little girl, and that night she was staying over for the first time. Prue finally felt confident that she could protect Lila from all the strange things that happen here. She was wrong. Little Lila had a problem with sleepwalking. And she took a trip into the hallway at 1:30 in the morning. Prue took a little too long to notice the sound she had heard was the front door, and by the time she reached the lift she saw the creatures dragging Lila's limbs away from her body. She tried to fight them, even killed one, but she couldn't save the little girl. I was hysterical, imagining Jamie's fate. What are the creatures? Have you ever actually seen them? I asked. No one really knows what they are, love. There's something to do with the building and all its quirks. No one's ever seen them elsewhere. We don't know where they came from, just that they're here. I've seen them a few times over the years, usually when new neighbors have left biscuits down for their cats and dogs or haven't disposed of food waste properly. They're curious little creatures, mostly harmless out of the hours Prue warned you about, but if they're fed they can become quite viscous looking for more food. That's why you have to bin all your scraps, or hide them or pack them or whatever. Just don't leave them out and don't use the lift at those times and you're safe from the creatures. They're a little smaller than humans, but they're a similar shape. They come with grotesque rodent-like features and are far larger than any rodent could be. Like rodent children, I suppose. They have 2 sharp rows of teeth per jaw and are consistently hungry. When they eat, they crunch down in a violent and disgusting way, dripping spittle everywhere. Prue said she could hear her granddaughter's bones shatter in those jaws. He went pale at the thought of that, but continued. When they first arrived in the building, there were hundreds. It caused pandemonium amongst the residents. We lost the residents of more than 30 of the individual homes. But the residents fought back and managed to kill all but the strongest minority of them. The creatures left over were incredibly dangerous and seemingly impossible to eradicate, so the residents struck a deal. A deal that they will be left unharmed and allowed to live in the building in return for the residents' safety at all times. But if anyone wanders into the lift between 1:11 and 3:33 a.m., they are fair game. This time frame is the period the creatures are at their most frenzied, and restricting them to the lift was safer for all parties. God help anyone who encounters them during those hours. They've been here ever since, claimed lots of unsuspecting people avoiding the stairs, but nothing like when they first arrived. A few got put down for not holding up their end of the bargain, but we haven't had an incident outside the lift in years. Count yourself lucky you missed that crisis. Everything here's pretty peaceful right now. I'm sorry about your boyfriend. I really have to go. I'm late for my round. He scrawled his phone number on a bit of paper and handed it to me. Emergencies only. I don't like to be bothered. You can't go. The note said you would help me, I exclaimed. And I will, he snapped back, when there's something I can help with. I can't resurrect your boyfriend and I don't like to be late delivering the post. I will see you soon, love. I was in shock. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. And I couldn't believe he was leaving me after the information overload and the small ray of hope he had lit inside me, and then squashed. I'll call the police, I shouted, desperate to feel as if I was solving this somehow. You can try if you want, Ian sighed, as he opened the door to leave. It just aggravates the creatures, and it isn't going to bring your boy back. Mr. Prentice hates it when police come too. If you want to get any sleep in the next week, then I'd avoid it. Wait a week, report him missing, and learn to adapt to life here, love, or you'll be dead in days." And with that, he shut the door behind him. I opened it again. I had so much more to ask, but he was gone. No sign of him anywhere in the corridor. Maybe it was me losing my mind. I might be imagining all these things. But no matter how much I willed it, the note was still there. And Jamie still wasn't. Georgia arrived not long after Ian had left. I, of course, asked if she had seen him in the corridor, to try and affirm to myself that he was real, but she hadn't. She looked at me worried and held me as I sobbed and told her what the postman had said about Jamie and the creatures. I wasn't sure she believed me. Even as she read the note, she looked skeptical. If she was skeptical, I wouldn't have blamed her, but she had always been supportive. She sat with me for hours while I just sobbed, heartbroken. I was so conflicted as to what to do. It felt insane that I hadn't contacted anybody, but this note had turned out to be accurate so far, and if the postman was to be trusted, then I should wait. Georgia had been my best friend for many years. She stuck up for me when I was too scared to do it for myself and had always been the brave one of the two of us. I felt safe around her. So after hours of crying and despairing at the way my life had changed in a matter of days, I finally decided to take a nap. It was early evening and Georgia was watching some TV. Just there for me if I needed her. Despite the deprivation, I struggled to fall asleep. I tried to imagine Jamie's arms around me, but it became a more painful reminder that they probably never will be again. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity of staring at the damp patch on ceiling, I drifted off. About 3 hours ago, I woke up, staring at the goddamn damp patch on the ceiling, and could hear chatting in the living room. I jumped out of bed and walked towards it. Georgia was on the sofa, with a middle-aged-looking woman, both nursing a cup of tea in the matching mugs that Jamie had got me as a move-in present. My blood boiled, but it wasn't their fault. I cleared my throat to get their attention. "Oh, Katie. This is Natalia. She lives upstairs. We got chatting, so I made her a cup of tea. I hope you don't mind." I looked at the dark-haired woman on the sofa, drinking tea from my cup, and nodded. Georgia was a sociable idiot with no understanding of when to not be herself. I wasn't going to lament her for it right now. It was her coping. Of course. "Hi, Natalia. What flat do you live in?" I tried my very best to be polite. I would have to discuss not bringing people into my home mid-tragedy with Georgia after she had left, but until then I would be neighborly. "Flat 71. It's so nice to meet you. You have a lovely home," Natalia responded. Her lips curled at the corners into a smile that wasn't replicated in her eyes or the rest of her facial expression. She looked at me smugly, with full knowledge that I was aware of the implications of what she had just said. The rules. The flat number. Every now and again someone will knock at your door claiming to live in one of these flats and ask to borrow some sugar. They will seem entirely average, but you must shut and lock the door immediately. I installed 2 extra security bolts to avoid the fuckers. I don't like to swear at my age, but they really are fuckers. Prue's warning echoed in my mind, and I couldn't take my eyes off Natalia. Something really was off about her. I looked at Georgia sat on the sofa next to her and noticed her sweating. Anyone in the UK knows that it's been hot for a few days, but this was beyond just the ambient temperature. Her entire body was dripping. Suddenly she began to pant. Natalia's eyes were locked to mine, just like the window cleaner's had been. Nothing happened before with the cleaner, except this time the rule had been broken. She was already in the flat. Georgia started to scream as her skin blistered and charred. Her hair fell from her scalp as the skin flaked and melted away from every inch of her. She was being burned alive without a flame in sight. She scratched frantically at her own melting face, digging into the exposed raw flesh. The sound a person makes when they burn alive is like no other. That will never leave me. I screamed and screamed, but no one came to my door. I tried to grab my phone to call Postman Ian, but the wooden surface I had set it down on burned my fingers to the touch and forced me to recoil. She was going to set the whole flat alight. My actions needed to be quicker than a phone call. I grabbed hold of the large knife I had set down on the side earlier when weaponizing. The handle blistered my fingers instantly, but I didn't care. I needed to get her out now and help Georgia if I could. I ran towards the dark-haired lady, sweat dripping from my brow the closer I got, and plunged the knife into Natalia's throat. She gripped it and fell to the floor. She didn't bleed like a normal human. Her insides were black, she was still moving, and I figured it probably wouldn't be long before she stood right back up and tried again. So I dragged her into the hallway, ready to bolt the door. As we reached the entrance of the corridor, one of the cats was waiting. Hissing at her semi-conscious body, I caught her eyes fixate on it as I dumped her on the floor. I grabbed the cat, pulled him inside, wincing as its skin caused more burns up my lower arms, shut the door and watched through the peephole. She got up and held her hand to the wound, cauterizing it and walking off towards the lift, as if she hadn't been injured at all. I dropped the cat by that point, but every bit of naked skin it had touched throbbed and burned for at least an hour. Georgia hadn't been as lucky as Natalia with injury recovery. I anonymously called an ambulance for her. I couldn't believe it, but she was still breathing. She was badly burned, and her life wouldn't be the same again, but she was alive. And for that I was grateful. It sounds awful, but I left her at the park across the road from the building, with no phone or ID. She's my best friend and I want to be there, but if I own up to involvement in injuries that bad, they'll suspect me, and I lose the already slim chance that Jamie might be savable. It doesn't mean I don't care about Georgia, but she's alive. I won't believe Jamie isn't until I see it. So now I'm alone again, in the flat, conflicted about what to do. I want to leave, so badly. But this was mine and Jamie's first home together. If he's alive, and I can save him, then I want it to be here for him to come back to. And if he's dead, and the postman is right, then I don't know if I can leave his memory behind. There's only one person I think could help me right now. So tonight I'm going to do some research, hunt down an address, and tomorrow morning I'm going to visit Prudence Hemmings. I didn't get much sleep last night either. The lack of sleep is making me wonder whether all these things happening are in my mind or not. But I'm reminded every time I see that damn note that it's all real. I spent hours last night searching for anything I could about Prudence Hemmings. If she had lived in a big, creepy mansion, I imagine she would have been easy to find. But us folk who live in tower blocks aren't so well documented. No one cares about our lives, no matter how extraordinary. I found an article about missing person Lila Hemmings. It suggested that she went missing under the care of her grandmother while playing in the park opposite the flats early in the morning. Interviews with her parents stated that they had both disowned Prudence. Despite the many years that had passed since Lila's disappearance, her parents appeared to have remained unforgiving of Prue. There was no mention of her on either of their social media accounts, and she appeared to have no involvement with the children they had acquired since. Searches for the Hemmings family in the local area were equally dead ends. I looked at link after link, desperate to find something, but they all started to blur into one. Until finally I saw something. An obituary for Bernard Bernie Hemmings, who had fallen from the tower block in unexplained circumstances after being diagnosed with dementia months before his death. I was surprised it hadn't made bigger news. It had only been about a year. There were no details of where to find them, but his wife Prudence and her sister Bridget were listed as contacts to find out details of the funeral. It's scary what you can do with the internet these days, but just with those phone numbers I was able to put them into a reverse directory and find an address for Bridget and Tony Bishop, the sister and brother-in-law that Prudence was supposedly living with. About 4 a.m. I managed to get some sleep, not much though. I was back up and wide awake at around 7 a.m., planning my route and working out my day. I saw a post on social media from one of her relatives that Georgia was identified and is stable. This loosened the knot in my stomach that has been present since I found the note somewhat. At 8:50, I opened the door to my flat hoping to see Postman Ian. 4 minutes passed, and instead of the postman, an elderly gentleman made his way down the corridor. He had a walking stick and kind eyes. In his free arm, he carried a small plastic bag containing a newspaper and milk. He smiled and said good morning as he passed. I smiled back. He reminded me of my granddad. I imagined him pulling cola cubes from his pocket for his grandkids and shushing them when their parents weren't looking. A little further down the corridor, the old man stopped and turned. He looked me dead in the eyes with a sympathetic expression and spoke. "No post on a Sunday, if that's what you were waiting for." He smiled knowingly and turned to unlock a front door that, until shut, I couldn't see the number of. When I saw the door close and the number 48 boldly displayed above the peephole, I understood what prudence had meant. Mr. Prentice did seem to be a lovely chap. I sat back in my flat and sighed, staring at the various tabs open on my laptop. At about 9:15, the knocking on the balcony door started. The window cleaner was back. I didn't feel half as terrified as I had the first time. If anything, I was just angry. It took every ounce of restraint I had in my tired body not to engage with him, if only to tell him to fuck off. His genuine-seeming requests just irritated me. After about 20 minutes of being watched, the knocking started to give me a headache, so I grabbed a bag and left the flat. I decided there was no time like the present. If I was going to turn up on the bishop's doorstep looking for her sister, because of the freaky flat she's left behind, then I had to get it over with. If the address was old, or the bishops weren't the people I was looking for, then I was going to look stupid whatever time of day I went. And I couldn't take the window cleaner's eyes anymore. There was something about them, they really do make you want to open that door. I looked at the lift as I entered the communal hallway and decided today I would take the stairs. I couldn't stand to be in a small box that my partner probably died very painfully in. My heart dropped into my stomach just at the sight of it. The stairs were as grotty as the lift. We'd taken them multiple times on move-in day, but I hadn't really taken it in the same way I could now. I thought about the rules and all the strange things happening in this building. I looked at the badly painted numbers on the walls as I reached each landing. Nothing in this building is simple. I looked at the numbers. 765, 54342G. Maybe it was the sleep deprivation, but my legs were in agreement with my mind that I had definitely just descended more than 6 flights of stairs. They'd glitched. I looked at the dusty and poorly lit stairwell from the bottom. It seemed dark, despite the sun pouring in from the glass panel in the main building doors. The note never mentioned glitchy stairs. Maybe I really was losing my mind. As I turned to exit the building, a woman walked in. She was in her late 30s to early 40s and had 2 small children in tow, 1 boy and 1 girl. I guessed that they were twins. They were both incredibly blonde, with deep brown puppy dog-looking eyes, and couldn't have been any older than 6 to 7. They were as close to identical as it gets in twins of different genders. I'm not a fan of kids, but they were super cute. The lady had a short bob haircut that got longer at the front. It was uniform and dyed a perfectly even auburn color. I knew it was dyed because her roots were blonde like her kids. She looked as tired as I felt, but she pulled herself together when she saw me, running fingers through S part of her hair that she must have missed however early she left this morning. "Hi, are you here visiting?" who opened with, trying to make small talk. "No, I just moved into flat 42 on the 7th floor. I was just leaving, actually." "Whereabouts are you?" I was desperate to go. I had feared myself up to see Prue, but I didn't want to be rude. "I'm flat 26. My name's Terry." "This is Eddie and Ellie." She gestured to the 2 small children hiding shyly behind her skirt. "Welcome to the block. If you ever need anything, please feel free to give me a shout." "My name is Katie, but people call me Kat too." "That's really kind of you. Thank you." "I will." "Hey, is there something wrong with the stairs?" I stopped myself before going into detail. "Nothing wrong. They just skip sometimes," she answered, shrugging. Well, I'd love to stop and chat, but I actually really need to get going. It was nice to meet you, Terry. I tried to work out what was wrong with the children as I stepped forward to walk away, still baffled by the stares. By the way, we have a residence committee. You should come to one of our meetings. They're every Tuesday in alternating flats. This Tuesday is at Molly Jefferson's place in flat 31. Come along. We'd love to have you, Terry suggested, waving me off. I walked out the doors after my encounter with Terry, feeling sick. Every minute in this place made the note more real. Every word jumped off the page and into my life, made it more likely that Jamie was really gone. I rode the bus from a stop not far from the flats. It felt like it took an eternity to reach the little suburban area I was looking for. A 5-minute walk away from the bus stop I got off at, and I was staring at a quaint little bungalow belonging to Bridget and Tony Bishop. I knocked on the door. The lady who opened it was unsteady on her feet. She was probably in her 70s, with wispy white hair neatly scraped back into a bun, 2 strands left hanging that just softened her wrinkled face. She wore a dusty rose-colored dress that hung just below her knees and smelled of stale cigarette smoke. "Can I help you?" she asked bluntly. "My name is Kat." "I'm looking for Prudence Hemmings," I answered, stuttering slightly. Her eyes widened slightly. "Why?" she asked, bizarrely. "Is she here? It's private." The lady ushered me into the house and sat me down on a sofa. Within minutes, there was a cup of tea in front of me. She didn't say anything to me for a while. We just looked at each other. Then she finally broke the silence. "I wondered if you'd try and find me." It took me a long time to decide whether to leave that note or not, but I decided that you deserved a head start. That's more than I ever got. The woman was Prudence. She was nothing like I had imagined. She seemed tough and hardened and spoke with a mostly blunt tone. She contributed before I could answer. "Terry called me not long ago. Told me that she had met the new tenant. She said you looked shaken up, and said that my note may not have been enough. I did say I couldn't fit everything on there, and the stairs didn't seem too important. The committee wanted to organize a meeting with you on your moving-in day, but I told them that was intrusive. The whole committee thing always seemed a bit excessive to me anyway." She spoke flippantly, like it was nothing. "It may have been intrusive, but we needed a warning. We spent a night in the place before I found your note. My boyfriend had already left for work at 3:15 and taken the lift. He didn't know I broke as I told her what had happened." Her face dropped. "And so did my hope for Jamie. I'm so sorry, I really don't know what to say. I thought my note would reach you in time," she mumbled, her face to the floor, refusing to look at me as tears streamed down my face. "He's gone, isn't he?" I didn't want to accept it, but I spoke to the postman and your face says all it needs to. "The postman said there might be a way I can have him back," I bit at her, devastated and angry. "He's gone. You can't have him back. What Ian is referring to isn't what you think. There's a way to get people back from the lift, but not as themselves, trust me. I learned the hard way. Once they're back, you can't reverse it. I'm sorry about your man, but he's gone forever. Don't dig into the other way. To be gone forever is luckier than that alternative." She still wouldn't look up from the floor. "What do you mean?" "I don't want to talk about it. I said in the note that there are things I'd rather not discuss, and I need you to respect that, or I won't be speaking to you at all. Now move on and ask what you need to ask." Prudence cut me off. I decided not to push the topic further, and moved on to some other things I needed to know. "What's the deal with Terry's kids? They seem sweet and normal." "Those little demon creatures are anything but normal," she answered, wincing slightly at the though of them. "When she went into labor, Terry never made it to a hospital. They were the first children ever to be born inside the building, and with everything that goes on, it's like something's rubbed off on them. They're average children in the daytime, but they never sleep. Ever. Poor Terry hasn't had a day's rest since they were born. They also really love to steal birds and rats they find the cats playing with and torment them. Really annoys the cats. As she finished speaking, a small hairless cat strutted out from behind an armchair across the room, meowing softly. It brushed its head up against Prue's exposed legs, leaving scorch marks where it touched. She didn't react. She reached down and stroked the top of its head, smiling as it purred. "And those?" I asked, eyes stuck to her now badly burned legs. She chuckled, pulled out a box, and lit a cigarette, tapping the top layer of ash into a small silver dish in front of her. She offered me one and I took it gladly. They've always been my good friends. I couldn't leave the building without bringing a part of home with me. This little guy is Damon. He's seen some things, she gushed, not taking her eyes off the cat. But where did they come from? Why are they everywhere? I asked, watching in disbelief as her burns subsided. It seemed impossible, but I looked at my arms where I had picked up the cat the night before, and there was no evidence it had ever happened. They didn't even appear sunburnt. No one really knows. They started to appear after the fire a few years after I'd moved in. It was rumored that they were the pets of the residents that burned, and that was why they had no fur. But I don't think that's true. I interrupted. I met one of those neighbors last night. She said her name was Natalia. She almost killed my best friend. You're crazy if you think your note was enough of a warning, I ranted emotionally. Look, girl, if I had made a song and dance about warning you, then you'd have thought me crazy and challenged the rules. You'd have been dead already. Be grateful you got anything. I didn't. I had to work it all out. Your generation are so spoiled. She tutted in frustration at me. I was angry, but she was probably right. An elderly lady telling me rat-like creatures would kill my boyfriend in a lift would probably have got some laughs from me a few days ago. I stayed quiet and waited for her to calm down. After a while, she sighed and started again. I think the cats are the neighbors that burned. They've never meant any harm and they hiss and run from the imposters that roam the building. Besides, there's no way there were that many cats living on one floor. The imposter people don't even match up with the residents that died in the fire. None of them look like, or claim to have the same name as the dead. They just claim to live in their flats. I've met Natalia before. She left a bad scar on Bernie's leg from an incident we had. Nasty girl. Before the fire there was CCTV and there was a recording saved of about 15 people marching into the flats and up to that floor about half an hour before the fire started. It was the only evidence found. CCTV wasn't great in the 80s, so they were never identified. And the flames melted the relevant cameras, so nothing ever came of it. I think the people that entered that night are the ones that ask for sugar. I don't know any more than that, but if you avoid them, like I said, you don't need to know more. They hate the cats. I hope your friend survives, but I've seen what those people can do, so maybe she was better off dead. Prue carried on stroking Damon. I watched the skin of her fingers melt and twist as they made contact with him. What happened to your husband? I asked the question so fast I didn't have time to consider that this was a topic she had explicitly said she didn't want to discuss in the note. But I had to know. She scowled at me. I said I didn't want to talk about that, she hissed. I just lost the love of my life. I need some answers, I begged. What happened to Bernie won't help you. I know you'd think any deaths in that building would be down to the quirks, but this wasn't. For the most part anyway. Don't forget that we had lived there for 35 years. Bernie knew the rules. We knew how to take care of ourselves and have a happy life there. It was our home. I don't doubt that's Mrs. Hemmings. I'm sorry, I interjected. Bernie had dementia. It started about 6 months before he died, and he deteriorated very rapidly. Towards the end, he started wandering. The doctors said it was common, but in our position, it was incredibly dangerous. More times than I can count, I pulled him away from the lift, just in time. Along with wandering, he was forgetting the rules. He let that smug, awful window cleaner in 3 times. Thank Lord for the big metal pipe I kept by the balcony door. Chased him out a treat. Not that anything stops him from coming back. I'm sure you're already acquainted. After all the dangerous situations Bernie was in, by the end he made the smallest and most fatal of errors. He left a bowl of food out for Damon at 10 a.m. I was out shopping with Terry and a few of the girls from the committee, and when I came back I found one of those awful creatures. Prudence started to cry. I put my hand on her shoulder in an attempt to comfort her. After all, I truly knew how she felt. It was eating him. She sniffed and steadied herself to continue, moving my hand. I chased the creature away with the same metal pipe I had the window cleaner and pushed Bernie off the balcony. He was heavy, but I didn't want anyone to know what really killed him. Its teeth. She shivered. They made such an awful noise. It reminded me of. Lila finished her sentence. I hadn't meant to. I was so invested in her story I couldn't help it. I gather you spoke with Ian, then she said, sounding resigned. I never meant to hurt that little girl. I loved her so much tears rolled down her wrinkled cheeks. Damon, who was now sat next to her on the sofa, shuffled closer as if to cuddle her. Haven't you ever been curious about getting her back? I asked, my mind turning back to the methods hinted at by both Prue and the postman. I miss Jamie so much. I'd do anything to get him back. Her face filled with a look of horror and shame. Of course I have, she answered, which is exactly why I'm telling you not to. But I couldn't let it go. Surely anything must be better than gone forever, I pestered. I wish I hadn't. Prudence, frustrated, stood up and gestured for me to follow. She led me outside to the back garden of the bungalow. At the back was a large shed, the kind people used for a man cave or a summer house. It was pretty. The sun shone down on it, lighting up the few cobwebs in the corners and making them twinkle. Mrs. Hemmings was careful to look into both neighboring gardens to ensure there was no one around before she unlocked the door to the shed. We stepped inside, and the first thing to hit me was the smell. It was putrid, like rotting meat. I looked at the floor and covered my nose with my hands. Staring back at me was a pool of blood. I followed the blood with my eyes as Prudence locked us in the shed. Then, after I made it past the animal bones, I finally saw it. Just like Postman Ian had described. One of the creatures was watching me from a heavy-duty metal dog cage in the corner of the shed. It looked reinforced, but still the metal had chew marks. Their jaws had to be strong to cause that. That didn't surprise me looking at it. Its rodent-like nose and beady, yet somehow human-like eyes were nothing compared to the 2 very visible rows of jagged, sharp teeth that lined each gum. Despite its small stature, it was terrifying. Prudence opened a drawer in a dusty cupboard across the room and pulled out a can of dog food. She poured the contents into the bowl and passed the bowl through the feeding hatch. The cage had a safety feature, meaning the animal couldn't access the food until the hatch was locked from the outside. I was grateful for this. Prue turned to me and spoke. She brushed one of the 2 strands of hair framing her face behind her ear. Gesturing to the hideous creature, she said, "Cat, I would like to introduce you to my granddaughter, Lila." I was in complete shock, looking at it. At her. Prudence had a facial expression filled with guilt, and now I knew the truth. I could see it. The creature was exactly how Ian had described, except with wavy ginger hair and a sadness in its beady eyes. This abomination was Lila. This was how Prudence had bought her back, and this was the only way I would ever see Jamie again, a risk I wasn't going to take. After days of disbelief, the reality finally hit me like a ton of bricks. Jamie was dead, and he wasn't coming back. "Why did you do this?" I asked, my voice shaking with horror. Prudence scowled at me, trying to mask her shame. "I didn't want this. If you think this was my aim, then you're sicker than I am. I just wanted my granddaughter back. When she died, a part of me died. My son blamed me. His wife blamed me. And although he never said it, I could see in Bernie's eyes that he did too. I'd pushed for her to stay. I wanted to spend more time with her. I got cocky about my ability to cope with the strange occurrences in the flats. I know what you must be thinking, but I swear I didn't know about the sleepwalking until it was too late. We had moved into the flat not long after my son left home to move in with his girlfriend. He's the youngest of 3 and was the last to fly the nest, so we downsized for the 2 of us. He never knew what we were facing in that flat, or the dangers that he sent his little girl into. When it happened, it was a few years after the fire and the troubles with the creatures. We'd struck the deal with the things in the lift, and the neighbors of the burned flats had become a fixture, just like the other quirks. I really thought she would be safe. Prudence paused to gaze longingly at the mutated little girl in the cage. The creature just twitched. In return, it bared its 4 rows of teeth and made a gentle hiss. "But how did you do this?" I stopped her with more urgency this time, looking at Rat Lila in disbelief. I had to get answers out of her fast. I didn't want to spend any more time than was absolutely necessary in this shed. "The gardener helped me," she answered, her voice trembling. "Who the fuck is the gardener?" I grew more impatient with every new confusion she threw at me. The last thing I needed was something new and potentially malevolent in the mix. "I didn't mention him in my note because he's been gone for over 20 years. He'll be of no concern to you, so don't worry. His damage is in the past now." Around the time Lila went missing, the council granted planning permission for the tower block next door. But before that was built, the land it sits on acted as a communal garden for ours and the neighboring tower block on the other side. It had a regular gardener named Derek, who you would often see tending the flower beds out front. Derek was one of the first people I met when I moved in. Like I said, I had to work it all out myself, and the first time the window cleaner came to the balcony, I naturally reached to let him in and offer a cup of tea. As my hand applied pressure to the handle to open the balcony door, there was a knock at the front door. I made a gesture to the cleaner to indicate that I would only be a minute and answered. There was Derek. He stopped me and told me not to let the man in, that I would be making a huge mistake. I thought he sounded crazy, and I told him so. After a while of arguing, I got up to reboil the kettle and let the man in, and Derek grabbed my hands and shouted at me to look at the man outside. When I turned to look, there was no man outside, but a monster. He was tall and impossibly thin, flesh and bones, but somehow thinner than bones, with graying skin stretched over them. He had eyes that seemed to be so deep set they went on forever, like the blackest cave you can imagine. Saliva dripped from his mouth and landed on my balcony floor, some sliding down the glass panel of the door. I opened my mouth to scream, but as I did, Derek let go of my hands and the monster was gone. In its place was that smug, friendly man, begging for a drink while he cleans the windows. It took me a minute to process it, but I know what I'd seen. That was the real window cleaner. I never intentionally opened or tried to open the door for him again. That day, Derek didn't stay long. He didn't tell me what the window cleaner is or why he visits every few days. He didn't explain anything about the weird things that go on. As much as Derek was a part of the strange happenings, he was like one that had been carved from light. He said that he'd always be around when I needed him, that it was his job to look after the residents just like the flower beds. Over the years, he appeared a few times. He was instrumental in striking a deal with the creatures. When the neighbors died in the fire, he created a special display for them in the garden and made sure that nothing planted was poisonous to the cats as soon as they arrived. He also stopped an imposter from killing Bernie at our front door. He seemed like such a good thing for the residents, always there to help, offer some gentle advice or a creative solution, someone to be trusted. He changed when they granted planning permission for the other block, though. He knew his garden would be dug up to lay foundations and his uses redundant. He became grumpy and bitter over time, but no one paid enough attention to notice. especially not when my tragedy struck. When Lila died, I was devastated. Derek appeared to me as I sat on a bench in the garden crying. He offered to help me, to use the garden to get her back. I snapped at him. I told him it was his fault, and that he should have been there when it happened to stop them. He worked so hard on the agreement with the creatures. He spent a lot of time with them. Lila broke the rule, and he had to allow them to do what had been agreed, he said. He couldn't have stopped them, but he wanted to help make things right. I understood why he hadn't intervened, but I couldn't accept it. I lashed out at him. I'm embarrassed to say I actually slapped the poor man, along with stamping on his freshly planted flower bed. I was angry and grieving. I quickly burned myself out and collapsed into a blubbering heap on the floor. Derek attempted to comfort me, but his mind was on his garden. He said he was sorry for my loss, but I shouldn't have attacked the flower bed, that he'd always been nice to me, and I should be kinder in return. I snapped and told him that it didn't matter because it was all about to be bulldozed in the next few days anyway. I should have taken more note of the way he twitched as I said that. He snapped. He said that he knew I was angry, but there was no need to take it out on him. If I was that desperate to get Lila back, he knew a way. But it was dangerous. I begged. Anything, I said. I would do anything. He told me it was simple, and that all I had to do was enter the lift and offer the creatures some food whilst repeating the phrase revertitur mortuis during their frenzied hours. He said that there was no guarantee they wouldn't be crunching on my bones before I even got the first word out, but that if I succeeded I would have Lila back. Of course it was successful. There wasn't a creature in sight as I performed the ritual as instructed. I thought nothing happened at first. She didn't appear straight away, but a few days later I found her running round inside my house. She'd taken a chunk out of Damon's ear with her teeth. I tried to kill her at first, but just as I was about to finalize it, I saw in her eyes who she was. I tried to look for Derek, but by that point the workmen had started. Nothing was left of his garden, and nothing was left of Derek. No one's seen him since. You see, Kat, nothing in that building is totally harmless. You have to be on your guard at all times. I've kept her like this ever since. You may think I'm crazy, but I couldn't kill my own granddaughter. I'm not a monster. Prue sighed and ushered me back out of the shed. She locked the door behind us, closing the padlock on her most hideous secret. I was exhausted. It was a lot of information to take in, and as a result of the information I'd received, real grief from my boyfriend was finally settling in. Every hope I had was dashed. I know many of you tried to tell me in the comments that he was gone, but I wanted you to be wrong so bad. I couldn't bear to look at Prudence Hemmings for another moment. I made my excuses and left, morosely riding the bus back to the tower block I had once been so excited to live in. It was mid-afternoon by time I got home. The choice between the stairs and lift didn't strike much enthusiasm into me, but I opted for the stairs. And after what I'm sure ended up being 11 flights, I made it the 6 flights up the stairs to my flat. I laid on our mattress on the floor and sobbed for Jamie. I sobbed so hard my throat went dry and hurt, and my stomach cramped with each gasping breath. I sobbed myself to sleep. My body and mind must have given up fighting the need to rest and shut down. When I woke up, it was late, about 10 p.m. I wrote as much of my update as I could for you guys, hit post, and just sat at the dining table with my head in my hands. My whole life had fallen to shit, and I knew I thought about so many things, questioned why they were happening to me. I searched social media for updates on Georgia, but there were none. Jamie wasn't super close with his family, but I knew it wasn't long before they'd start to worry. Everything I considered just snowballed in my mind. The loneliness in dealing with this situation was killing me. I decided to do something I usually wouldn't. I went downstairs and I knocked on the door of flat 26. Terry answered. Her perfectly bobbed hair was a little unkempt and out of place, She had huge bags under her eyes, and I could smell wine on her breath. "Are you okay, Kat?" She looked concerned. I found it ironic that she looked so disheveled I had forgotten it was me who came for help. "I'm not. I'm sorry. I know I don't know you. I could barely speak. Don't worry. Prue called me. She told me everything. I'm sorry about your boyfriend. It's a shame I never got to meet him." Terry stared back at me with the same expression a mother would, warm and understanding. "Would you like a cup of tea, maybe something stronger?" "I'd love a coffee, please," I answered meekly, making way into the living room. Her sofa was comfy. It reminded me of being back home at my parents' before any of this started. Terry trotted out to the kitchen, stumbling slightly. I could see the kitchen counter from the sofa, and the empty bottle of wine that accounted for her stumbling. As she boiled the kettle, there was a huge crash from somewhere inside the flat. I jumped, feeling startled. Terry coughed in a meager attempt to conceal the noise. "Excuse me for just a moment, please," she muttered apprehensively as she walked out of the living area and into the hallway containing the bedrooms. I heard another crash, giggling, and some inaudible shouting. After a while, things went quiet, and Terry came back into the living room. "Sorry about that, kids, you know," she announced, brushing off the noises. I'd almost forgotten about Eddie and Ellie. It was late already, and by the resigned expression on Terry's face indicated that this was how all her nights began. I nodded. I couldn't muster up much more of a response. I think she could see that I just needed to sit there. She got up to finish making, and then set the cup of tea in front of me with 2 digestive biscuits. I hadn't eaten properly in days, and I really needed the sugar. It turned out me and Terry get along really well. We have similar taste in movies, music, and food, despite the age gap. We spoke for about an hour about random, normal stuff. It was nice to get a break from the madness. I got used to the crashing around from the twins. I even laughed a few times. I'd forgotten what that felt like these past few days. The break didn't last long. The next noise that we heard was louder than the first. It was quickly followed by 2 small children running into the living room, diving into their mother's arms. I was taken aback for a moment. Eddie and Ellie were dressed in pajamas, and were still the cute children that I had met in the hallway. But something was different. Their brown puppy dog eyes had become deep voids, like what I'd imagined when Prue described the window cleaner's true form. And at the ends of their fingers were long, sharp claws protruding from where nails should be. I didn't have time to recoil in terror at their new looks. Terry clutched them and asked what was wrong. They wailed and buried the voids where their eyes should be into their mother's shoulders. Despite their terrifying exterior, these were 2 very scared little kids. It had been a very long day, and I thought my nightmare was over, but it was only just beginning. Ellie mumbled into Terry's shoulder, in that high-pitched voice kids do when they're scared. "Mummy, we're sorry, we didn't mean to let them in. We were just teasing." "Shh, they're coming," hissed Eddie, in the same distressed, high-pitched tone. "Whose?" "What have you done?" Terry asked, color drained from her face. The kids didn't get a chance to reply. Terry's face turned paler than I thought possible. I looked up, and standing in the living room doorway were about 10 people, all incredibly average-looking. They were almost expressionless. They didn't look angry or pleased to see us. They were dressed in nondescriptive clothes. I imagined trying to describe them to one of those artists that draws pictures for the police, and I genuinely don't think even one of them had a distinguishing feature. That's why it took me a while to spot her in the crowd, even though she had been glaring at me the entire time. Natalia. That's not the end of the story. If you have hooked up till here, then hit like button and comment down what do you think will happen next. Also, if you haven't subscribed yet, then do support me by subscribing so you may not miss any video in future.